Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel, Hydra's Ultimate Weapon. Chapter 41. Don't be nervous. Rorschach raised his head, looked at Strack and said with a smile. I won't kill you before you have any remaining value. But the premise is, you still have value. Rorschach's words were terrifyingly rational. But the evil spirit mixed in the words also made Strack feel cold. He knew that this was the ultimatum given to him by Rorschach. If he didn't behave, give up your own value. Rorschach will not be merciful. In the blink of an eye, the train has passed the track and driven out of the tunnel. Suddenly, an area of development suddenly opened up in front of him. The train continued to fly forward, escaping from the explosion that was about to explode. Hydra base. Calculating the distance, everyone has driven more than 10 kilometers away by car. And calculating the time, boom. A shocking explosion sounded from behind. Everyone looked together and saw a grand fireworks scene, which suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Gorgeous sparks splashed everywhere, and the aftermath of the continuous explosion was continuously blasting in the ears, contributing to the continuous grand performance. Such a wonderful scene is definitely an epic scene that is unique in the world. The terrifying follow-up impact also swept over in an instant. Everyone's hair was blown by the impact was blown backwards, and this was just the first wave of air. The subsequent shock waves were even more visible to the naked eye. Even if they were far away from the center of the explosion, an ordinary mortal body would encounter such a terrifying. I'm afraid there will be no benefit from the impact, and I will have to suffer some internal injuries. Fortunately, Rorschach and his party are not ordinary people. It is Straker who is the weakest. When the shock wave gently brushed his body, his face suddenly turned pale, and he stood. It was a bit difficult for everyone to stand. As they escaped from the base, the train also completed its historical mission. Its speed gradually slowed down, and finally stopped on the ground. Quicksilver and others also jumped off the train. After all, it's saying goodbye to the past. Seeing this shocking scene in the distance, Quicksilver was filled with emotion, but he also expressed his true feelings. With the explosion of this base, everyone had to bid farewell to the past and open a new chapter. Only Straker listened. With these words, his already disadvantageous body began to tremble even more. What was exploding was the past of Kuayin and others. But what was exploding was also his hard work. No matter how heartbroken he was, he had to. I was holding back and couldn't say it out loud, so as not to arouse Rorschach's resentment. After all, Quicksilver and Wanda may not have many negative emotions, but Rorschach, a thorn in the side of the laboratory, really can't think of any reason why he would miss this place. Rorschach, this is what you have in your hand. Wanda is good at observation and immediately discovered that Rorschach did not return empty-handed. He was holding a robot head in his hand. The electric beam lines of the mechanical head were exposed, and there was even some leakage. It looked like a waste product. Rorschach weighed Ultron's head and didn't hide it. He is our future partner, and his name is Ultron, but as you can see, it still takes a lot of effort for him to officially meet as an act with us. The most basic thing is that we still lack a qualified laboratory. Straker, I believe you can show your value, right? Straker immediately understood Rorschach's subtext. His face was pale, but he did not hesitate and replied quickly. Yes, I have a secret Hydra laboratory in my head for studying biological sciences, and I hope it can help. This is to show your own value. Prisoners who have no use value, especially those on the blacklist like Strack, have no need to live. Of course, Strack can also rely on the intelligence in his head to try to negotiating with Rorschach, or even threatening Rorschach, although he could try it. Judging from the actual results, he obviously did not dare to make such an attempt. Then, with the idea of avoiding responsibility, Strack explained. But after all, it was a research laboratory focusing on biological sciences, and it might not be very proficient in robotics. Strack looked at Ultron's head and came back to his senses. He felt a little familiar. It seemed, is it also one of the base's previous research projects? It's just that there hasn't been any big progress, so it's been put aside. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Rorschach would dig him out and even take him out before the base exploded. Seeing Rorschach holding Ultron's head like a baby, Straker was a little puzzled. But right away, Ultron used his real skills to tell everyone how extraordinary he was. Don't bother them. As long as I have materials and electricity, I can do everything myself. A weak mechanical voice came from the mechanical brain. Wanda and Quicksilver looked on, feeling very interesting and amazed. They didn't know the magic of Ultron yet. But Natasha was hearing Ultron. After taking the initiative to speak, her eyes suddenly widened. She immediately thought of Jarvis. Although Ultron is inferior to Jarvis in many aspects, but in the project of subjective initiative, it seems that he is far behind. Far surpassing Jarvis. Whether artificial intelligence has its own subjective thoughts is very important. No matter how intelligent the former is, it is still just a machine, controlled by humans. The latter is already transforming into a real human being. Have your own independent thinking ability. The S.H.I.E.L.D. spaceship arrived late. Nick Fury brought Tony and the others in with his right-hand man, Agent Hill. After meeting Tony Stark, Nick Fury's face suddenly became even more ugly. Originally it was just the dark skin of a normal black person. At this moment, it's like being in the dark. It's extremely embarrassing. Tony, you don't trust me. He said this to Tony Stark, and then looked at Captain Steve. His voice was very bitter. Steve, couldn't you persuade Tony to do something like this? Perhaps in Nick Fury's heart, Tony Stark still has a deeper image of the playboy he used to be. Therefore, Tony Stark may be a little immature and behave too naively. But Steve, Captain Husband, shouldn't have such a temper. Counting the ice period, they are over 100 years old. Steve could only pretend he didn't see Nick Fury's resentment. He was not in good condition at this time. He was already covered in bandages and was lying on the hospital bed. It happened that there were 2 beds in the emergency room, and he and Saul happened to have 1 bed each. After hearing Fury's words, he coughed several times before speaking. Tony's judgment was not wrong. There is a traitor within S.H.I.E.L.D., you know it and I know it, everyone present knows it, but there is no clue who it is, and I can only make sure that his identity and position are not too low. If S.H.I.E.L.D. is notified in advance of this battle to attack the Hydra base, there is a high probability that it will be leaked. By then Hydra will have countermeasures, and our situation will be even more dangerous. Therefore, I think Tony will the judgment made is not wrong. Nick Fury said in a bad tone. Tony didn't make a mistake in judgment, and then you ended up like this. Your injuries would have killed dozens of other people. And Thor lost an arm directly. After seeing Thor's miserable state, the veins in the corners of Nick Fury's eyes popped up. If any crown prince on Earth becomes like this, it will undoubtedly be a major diplomatic incident. Not to mention, this is the legendary Thor, the god of thunder, is the next god king of the land of the gods of S.H.I.E.L.D. What if the current god king is furious and punishes him? Thor's mood suddenly became even worse when he heard Nick Fury's worried words. Get up. He replied in a muffled voice. Don't worry, I can't die yet, this arm. Don't worry, this matter has nothing to do with you. This is what Nick Fury was waiting for. He cannot be angered by the God King of S.H.I.E.L.D. This is almost the consensus of all officials. After Steve coughed sharply, he spoke again, excusing Tony. There is nothing wrong with Tony's planning steps. We naturally have our considerations in choosing to do this. In the end, the situation evolved into such a bizarre situation. The only thing we didn't expect was that the enemies we encountered in this battle were really too strong. That guy has almost no weaknesses and is simply powerful in all directions. Thunder God Thor also recalled the disheveled figure in his mind. Although there was obviously something wrong with his clothing, his overbearing and terrifying strength had become a nightmare in his heart. The guy who calls himself Rorschach is terrifyingly strong. As long as he is still there, this Hydra base will be difficult to break. As soon as Thor finished speaking, there was a loud explosion on the ground in the distance. The explosion was so violent and powerful that it seemed as if it was right next to your ears and right in front of your eyes. The S.H.I.E.L.D. spacecraft was floating thousands of meters high in the sky. At this time, everyone shook involuntarily, obviously affected by it. Tony was the first to rush to the window, and saw the source of the explosion through the window of the S.H.I.E.L.D. spacecraft. Look at where the mushroom cloud rose. Tony Stark suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief. This direction. That's right, it's that Hydra base. Why did this base explode? Obviously there is that guy named Rorschach. Even if follow-up support from S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives, it will be extremely difficult and dangerous to crack this hard nut. Thor just said that this Hydra base is difficult to break. The next second, the base exploded. A face was slapped with a bang, and his face became even more ugly. Nick Fury turned his head quickly, and he had some guesses. With that, Rorschach around, this Hydra base would be difficult to break. But the current situation in this base looks like it has actively started the self-destruction process. This does not make sense unless that Rorschach, he is not actually Hydra. It's also possible that this Hydra base was attacked by a more powerful enemy, but this probability is too low. It's just a military base, how could it be so? Crouching tiger, hidden dragon. How many people's attention has been attracted before and after this? Well, it's not so charming, right? Ahem, it is difficult for outsiders to guess what the inside story behind the explosion of this Hydra base was. But the thing that needs most attention now is not this, but where are Natasha and Hulk now? Steve coughed twice, but in the end he failed. He struggled and expressed the anxiety in his heart. After a bloody battle with Rorschach, each of them suffered from large and small injuries, and finally got lucky escape. Natasha and Hulk, on the other hand, never fought Rorschach head-on during the whole process. Because of this, when Tony and Natasha evacuated, they were not together, and the two parties were separated. Looking at the scope of this explosion, it affected a wide area. Will Natasha and Hulk be implicated? Don't worry, these two auspicious people have their own destiny, and everything will be fine. Nick Fury looked gloomy and waved his hand to order. When the explosion subsides, immediately organize manpower to conduct a blanket search to find out the cause of the explosion and other important clues. Especially the whereabouts of the two Avengers, Natasha and Dr. Banner, even if you are alive, you want to see people, if you are dead, you want to see corpses. And when S.H.I.E.L.D. finally began to conduct a blanket search, Rorschach and other parties involved had already traveled thousands of miles away and arrived at the secret laboratory mentioned by Strack. This place can be called a small secret experimental base, focusing on biological sciences. This experimental base is ostensibly sponsored by a Nordic foundation to develop special medicines. In fact, it is a secret experimental base secretly funded by Hydra. The biological science medicine produced at the base has the effect of increasing human body quality. The effect is definitely not as good as the super soldier serum, but it is still a good medicine and has helped Hydra create many elite agents. The most important thing is that the person in charge of this experimental base does not deal with Strack. Although it is an act of diverting misfortune to the east, this diversion of misfortune also depends on the circumstances. There is definitely a difference between killing an opponent that you didn't like before and doing nothing at all. Oh, my dear Lord Baron Strucker, you are such a rare visitor. Didn't you say that you would never come to my place? After all, I know that this place you call me in private smells of dead rats. Kalami, the person in charge of the experimental base, had a somewhat strange expression when he learned that Straker had arrived. After all, Straker did not deal with him, and the latter had almost no contact with him. This sudden arrival seemed very strange. Is weird. Could it be? Is it for the share of biopharmaceuticals next year? So you came here in advance to ease the relationship. Hydra's various bases are very secretive, but big news like the explosion of the base cannot be concealed. The whole world will know it in a few days. But as soon as the front foot of the base exploded, Struck's rear kick was already came thousands of miles away and appeared in front of Kalami. With such a small time difference, no matter how clever Kalami was, he couldn't calculate such an incident. He welcomed Straker into the base full of suspicion. When Quicksilver and when Wanda walked through the passage and stood on the left and right of Strucker, Kalami thought this was normal. As the person in charge of the base, it is normal to have several guards around him at all times, right? But when Rorschach walked through the passage, when he came in front of everyone, and even took a step forward to stand in front of Strack, Karami's expression became abnormal. Is Strack's subordinate a little too unruly? And when Black Widow, Natasha and Hulk appeared behind Straker, Kalami finally became furious and could not calm down. Strucker, what the hell are you doing? He was too lazy to add, Lord Baron. After all, Baron in the new era is basically just a title, and its psychological comfort is greater than its symbolic meaning. Straker grinned after hearing this. Karami, didn't I hear that you were busy at this base and very tired, so why don't you quickly bring a few capable people to help you? In addition, He sniffed twice with a look of disgust. I'm still saying the same thing, your place just smells like a rat. He was still in a weird mood. Rorschach was completely too lazy to pay attention to Kalami. As if he was in a deserted place, he looked around and nodded with satisfaction. This experimental base was very satisfied with his psychological expectations and could be used as a temporary base is used. This base is an experimental base, and the security work is definitely not as good as that of Straker's military base. But to Rorschach, the military is nothing, and security is nothing. As long as others stand there, that is the safest and most secure place. Especially in this experimental base, there are a lot of various materials and instruments. There are many things that Ultron can use. As you can imagine, only the next Ultron with a mechanical head will usher in his new life in this base. Not bad. From today on, I will take over this base. Rorschach looked around and quickly made a decision. With a wave of his hand, the matter was settled. Kalami was angry and laughed when he heard this. Is Straker doing this to be funny? Who do you think you brought here to take over this experimental base with just a few words? It's just a joke. Are these people all brainless? Do not make jokes. Straker, your stupidity makes me sick. Kurami snorted coldly, and slowly stepped back. At the same time, at his signal, a group of Hydra warriors rushed forward, ready to give this group of people a good look. The visitors are true guests. Hydra, I also accept this truth. But this time, the visitor was obviously a bad visitor, so don't blame him for going on a killing spree. However, he only lasted 3 seconds. After taking a step back, Kalami, his body stiffened and he could no longer move. He no longer dared to move because a cold barrel was already pressed against the back of his head. He looked up slightly and saw that at some point, Kuayin had lost his. He appeared behind Kalami with a gun in hand, and easily staged a scene of capturing the thief first. The group of Hydra warriors summoned by Kalami met an even more miserable end. Hulk saw that there was someone. Pan Kai was brought to the door on his own initiative, and he immediately roared and beat his chest fiercely with both hands. Then he jumped up, like a tiger descending from a mountain, and beat these selected Hydra elites like a son. They became a group of cripples. But Rorschach did not interfere with these matters. He took Ultron's mechanical head to the center of the command room and connected Ultron's information flow with the command room's database. Now, whether it is physical resources or virtual resources in this experimental base, all of them are named Luo. At this time, Rorschach seemed to notice something. He turned around suddenly and his eyes fell on Hulk. From the very beginning of this battle, Hulk had maintained the Hulk's posture and took control of the body. Continued for a long time. Judging from the current situation, after Hulk has been active for a long time, it is finally a period of rest. The human form dominated by Bruce Banner is finally beginning to gain the upper hand and control the body's right to move. Hulk behaves a little strangely. After knocking down a group of Hydra warriors, he covered his head and knelt on one knee, showing a look of pain on his face. There was also a roar coming from the throat, and it was obvious that something was very wrong. At first, I still didn't understand what happened. But soon, as Hulk began to shrink in size, the green skin color on his body began to transform into that of an ordinary person. Now, everyone understood what happened. After all, ordinary people know some common sense about the superhero Hulk, not to mention a bunch of Hydras present. As an enemy, he naturally understands it more clearly. Those who know you best are often your enemies. Hulk. Natasha shouted softly, but soon she changed her title. Banner, is that you? Are you finally back? The Hulk, no, to be precise, Bruce Banner, finally appeared in front of everyone at this time. He was half kneeling on the ground with a weak body, beating his arms on the ground. After hearing Natasha's call, his body trembled, and then he responded sadly. Natasha, you shouldn't have come here. Hulk, I can't control Hulk's actions, he has his own will, and you know this. When he was on the battlefield, Hulk was unwilling to be an enemy of Rorschach from the beginning, and when Rorschach and Steve and others fought, he chose not to help each other and left the battlefield. At that time, no one knowing what was going on, Natasha was worried about Hulk's condition, so she followed him. After the battle on the frontal battlefield ended, Hulk returned to the battlefield again and formally met with Rorschach. And Natasha, she still followed and did not leave. This is what Bruce Banner said. He has no control over what Hulk does. But Natasha, she shouldn't have followed and ended up being Rorschach's prisoner. Natasha smiled bitterly when she heard this, and then she said very firmly, "You are my comrade in arms, Hulk is also my comrade in arms." In that situation, no one knew what kind of problems Hulk encountered. How could I abandon Hulk and leave? They are comrades who fight side by side and go through life and death together. How could Natasha just walk away and ignore the Hulk? Dr. Banner was a little crestfallen. He didn't agree with this. But he couldn't refute anything. As for escaping, after returning from the Hulk to a human body, he becomes an ordinary person. At most, he has stronger resistance to blows and a thicker blood tank. Hulk's superpowers are not what he possesses. Escape from Rorschach is even more nonsense. Luo Xia looked left and right, and after glancing around, he roughly understood the specific situation. He didn't waste any time. After seizing the initiative from Kalami, he began to assign tasks. Although this base is dedicated to research, it should also have a prison area. After all, it is Hydra's territory. Put these two Avengers in prison and keep them under strict supervision. Remember, if Dr. Banner transforms into the Hulk again, release him immediately. Bruce Banner in human form is clearly our enemy and does not subscribe to our ideals. But the Hulk, without a doubt, is part of my team. Kalami was still being held against his head by Quicksilver with a firearm at this time. He responded with a grimace. "Lord Rorschach, I will obey all your orders, but can you ask your subordinate to put down his gun? It's not that I want to talk about any conditions, it's just that I'm just worried that he might go off. If his hand slips, who will he cry to?" Kuai-yin stared, thinking, "You don't believe in my strength. My hand slipped and the gun went off, could I kill you with one shot?" Kuai-yin wanted to say, but, looking up at Rorschach's eyes, he said no more, nodded slightly, put away his gun and retreated. Ultron was already connected to the command platform at this time, and with his methods, he easily broke through the base. The internal firewall used all security measures for his own use. While charging and backing up, he warned Kurami, "Don't worry, I have taken over all the monitoring systems inside the base. Any bad behavior he does will not escape my sight." Kalami kept shouting and didn't dare. Sweat broke out on his forehead and he began to wipe it off. What kind of monster and what kind of number is this? At this time, Ultron had already filtered the entire base database and picked out the key points, immediately asked. In the base warehouse, among the resources and materials, there is actually a rough vibranium stone stored. Even with the mechanical tone, you can hear the shock in Ultron's words. An irregular or rough stone was placed in front of everyone. This rough stone looks gray, no different from ordinary shale. However, inside the original stone, there are some traces of faint blue lines dotted, which makes it look a bit extraordinary. No one would have thought that the raw material of vibranium rough stone would look like this. Speaking of vibranium, many people may not understand it and have little impression of it. But as long as one thing is mentioned, everyone will instantly show an expression of suddenly realizing it is so. Captain America's iconic equipment, the shield with the stars and stripes printed on it, is made of vibranium. Of course, it is not 100% pure vibranium, but mixed with other rare metal composite materials. The preciousness of vibranium is evident. But now, a rough vibranium stone as big as a millstone appeared in front of everyone. Vibranium is precious, and Kalami's experimental base finally obtained such a piece. In the past, it only cut a small part for research, and never squandered it in large quantities. Then, it's cheaper for Rorschach and his team. Luo Xia took a step forward, stretched out his right hand to hold the original stone, and then lifted it up with his backhand, testing the weight. A piece the size of a millstone. Substances such as stones that have a mass far beyond ordinary. Such a stone weighs close to 300 kilograms. After Rorschach weighed it up, he gave his own judgment. Ultron said, "The vibranium content in this rough stone is not high, about 1/20th. In the end, about 20 kilograms of vibranium can be extracted." Rorschach, "My most beloved boss Luo, I hope that I can use this vibranium and some other composite metals to initially create my body." Ultron is obviously very eager to use this piece of vibranium. He even complimented Rorschach in a very unfamiliar way, flattering him in a way that he was very unfamiliar with. But his voice when flattering was still cold and very abrupt, not pleasing to the eye. But Rorschach doesn't care about these things. In contrast, Rorschach cares more about the value that Ultron can create for him. Ultron has very strict requirements for his body. But no matter how strict it is, vibranium is extremely precious, and there is no way to completely use vibranium to make it. It can only be made from these 20 kilograms of vibranium as the main body, and other metals are added to fill it in. Rorschach does know where to find it. Vibranium, not to mention dozens of kilograms, hundreds of kilograms. You have to use tons as the unit of measurement. But now we have only initially obtained Ultron's loyalty. Is the latter's loyalty above the passing line? Shaw still needs to continue to investigate. Therefore, things about Wakanda must continue to be concealed. These vibraniums are given to you for use, only in your hands can they show their greatest value. Seeing Ultron's eager eyes, the mechanical head showed eager emotions. Rorschach no longer hesitated and took the initiative to use vibranium to make Ultron's body. Then everyone took action individually. Even Rorschach himself found a room near the command room, where he closed his eyes and rested quietly for a while. Since being trapped in a laboratory prison, he has lived a life in which he cannot control his own life and death. Now that I have regained my freedom, I was a little uncomfortable at first. But what emerged in his head immediately was the unquenchable anger of revenge. Soon, although some time has passed, none of those fools can escape. Rorschach murmured to himself, with an extremely cold expression. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Rorschach had already identified the visitor as Wanda. He opened his mouth to let the latter in, and then Wanda walked in. Luo Shaw was sitting on the sofa, pressing her temples gently. Without opening her eyes and looking at Wanda, she just asked softly. Wanda, why are you looking for me? If you don't come to the Three Treasures Hall for anything, you must have something to come to him for. Wanda didn't speak at the first moment, but walked behind the sofa, stretched out her hands to replace Luo Shaw's actions, and used her little hands to gently press Rorschach's temples, which has a massage effect and makes Rorschach very useful. I came here to ask you about your next plan, Wanda said softly. Luo Shaw nodded slightly, already understanding Wanda's intention. He replied, Indeed, it's time for me to fulfill my promise. You and Quicksilver have successfully completed the task I assigned you and handed Loki's scepter into my hands. Then according to the previous covenant, I should also help you fulfill your wish. In fact, your wish our goals are consistent with mine, and I will never break my promise. Wanda was stunned for a moment, then quickly explained. No, I didn't mean to urge you. We just had a big battle, we should have some time to breathe. I just want to ask about your next plan, Rorschach, so that I can be prepared. Luo Shaw smiled, then his smile faded and his voice became serious. Soon, the next action will come soon. After Ultron's body is finished and you have no other need to rest, we can start taking action immediately. After hearing Rorschach's words, Wanda was shocked. She came here just to ask about her future plans. Unexpectedly, Luo Shaw didn't plan to rest too much and just launched the next action plan. You know, Rorschach had just destroyed a Hydra base and fought a bloody battle with the Avengers. Then he personally captured 2 Avengers. To be precise, he captured one and incited another one to rebel. In short, Rorschach definitely did something extraordinary. If it were other people, even if they were made of iron, they should have rested and adjusted for a period of time. I don't know if they could bear it mentally, but their bodies definitely couldn't bear it. It is necessary to cultivate the body to some extent and treat some hidden injuries and so on. It turns out that this kind of thing doesn't exist at all with Rorschach. Just wait for Ultron to finish building his steel body, and he will immediately strike hard. Is this too urgent? And Rorschach, you just had a big fight. Wanda couldn't help but persuade her. When Luo Shaw heard this, he raised his eyebrows. Too pressed for time. No, I never felt that way. I have been recuperating in the laboratory for too long, so long that I feel like my whole body is covered with mold and I am about to get hairy. That feeling of being able to silently feel your body rotting and smelly, I don't want to encounter again. Luo Shaw talked about his past experiences, and then said sternly. Therefore, my concept of time is very strict in a sense. Wanda, do you and Quicksilver have anything else going on? If so, just mention it, and after solving other trivial matters, devote yourself to our plan. He warned emphatically. Our goal is very ambitious, and it is very difficult to achieve it. We must devote all our efforts to it, and there is no room for any surprises. Hearing this, Wanda waved her hands repeatedly and said with a wry smile. No, what does Kuiin and I have to do? You had a head-on conflict with the Avengers, and you didn't need to rest after a battle. Quicksilver and I just dealt with some Hydra fish, and we didn't get hurt at all, so we didn't need to rest. After a slight hesitation, Wanda continued. It's just that I feel in my heart that you have never had a moment of leisure. Are you pushing yourself too hard in some aspects? Luo Sha shrugged and said indifferently. It's just what you think in your heart. I have never had these thoughts. In my opinion, from beginning to end, I have been doing what I can. Seeing Rorschach's insistence, Wanda stopped mentioning this matter and shut her mouth obediently. The room was quiet for a while. There was only a slight breathing sound. It was not Rorschach's breathing, but Wanda's somewhat breathing nervously. She rubbed Rorschach's temples, looking a little nervous. And Rorschach, his breathing was almost unprecedented, and even from such a close distance, the sound of his pulse beating and his heart rising and falling had never been heard. Wanda could only blame all this on Rorschach's extremely low metabolic frequency. This situation is also related to the physical fitness of each person. The heart beating frequency of some professional athletes is much lower than that of ordinary people. After a long while, Wanda asked softly again. I asked Ultron before coming and how long it would take. It replied that it could take as long as 10 days or as little as 1 week to create its own body. He seemed to have to use a lot of materials and almost rummaged through the warehouse of the experimental base. Rorschach was noncommittal. Ultron has extremely high requirements for his body, and his psychological expectation is that it is composed entirely of vibranium. But as you can see, there is only a small amount of vibranium, so he can only use other precious metals to make it up. It seems that the amount of other metals is if it's enough, then there's no big problem. Wanda hesitated for a long time before asking the most important question. Ultron, can we trust him? Although I don't know anything about him, from what happened after he appeared, I can roughly confirm that he is an artificial intelligence created by Hydra. Can the creation of Hydra be trusted? Rorschach turned back and looked at Wanda. It is true that Ultron was born in Hydra, but his appearance was more caused by a series of coincidences. What's more, Wanda, aren't you and Quicksilver also Hydra in the eyes of the S.H.I.E.L.D. gang? My ultimate weapon, in the eyes of S.H.I.E.L.D., isn't it also a definite Hydra? In this regard, Gemini, Rorschach, Ultron, and Hydra all have a complicated relationship that is constantly being cut and confused. And how does Rorschach view this matter? He gave Ultron sufficient trust. On that piece of white paper, traces belonging to Rorschach were printed hard. In the central control room, Ultron has used existing materials to assemble 2 crude mechanical arms as temporary primary equipment for his own use. He is checking various materials at this time. All the materials and data of the Kalami experimental base are already included in his data, allowing him to take whatever he wants. What to do next? Ultron has already made a plan in his mind. The rest just takes time to manufacture and assemble. According to Ultron's data, the time required to create a body is roughly 7 days plus 6 hours. The reason why we say, as little as a week, as much as half a month, is to set the schedule ahead of time and leave enough time for yourself, so as not to get angry and work overtime in a hurry. After all, if everything is not guaranteed, there will be surprises. As long as everything goes smoothly, it will take more than 7 days to steadily complete the task, but there may be a power outage, and there may be conflicts or wars. The actual owner of this place is Hydra after all. Judging from this incident, Ultron already has a very anthropomorphic level of intelligence, and everyone knows how to take precautions in case something unexpected happens. At this time, the movements on Ultron's robotic arm suddenly paused, as if there was a power outage. This is a feeling called trust. A flow of information was transmitted in the Ultron data analysis library, making him feel an extremely complex emotional fluctuation. It was a special emotion unique to humans that cold machines did not have. At this moment, Ultron, I tasted a trace of it. Obviously, Ultron heard the words Rorschach said to Wanda, those words, giving trust to Ultron, just like giving trust to Gemini. This is really not Ultron's stealing. Listen, but Rorschach knew very well that he was short of manpower, so he gave Ultron a lot of power, letting him monitor the entire base and always have insight into the movements of these Hydras in the base. This naturally included Rorschach's this room. Ultron scanned this room at the same time and found no bugs. As for him being able to learn these words, it was entirely with the help of the internal system of the Hydra base. Under normal circumstances, Rorschach's the office certainly has internet communication channels, but there is no possibility of being monitored in the bedroom. However, Rorschach did not plan where his bedroom would be, nor did he directly say which rooms did not need to be monitored. After all, Rorschach had just occupied this base and had just arrived, so many things had not been handled properly. So in this case, such an accident occurred. Should Ultron be blamed for this kind of thing? That is definitely not possible. After all, Ultron was just completing the tasks assigned to him by Rorschach. What does it feel like to be trusted? Ultron never knows anything about it again. Today, he personally tasted it and felt that it was extremely complicated and it was difficult to explain the specific details. But apparently, it was supremely delicious. In the control room, the two robotic arms seemed to be waving more neatly. Ultron, you should have heard it, right? If I didn't hear it, then I would have to doubt his specific abilities and whether he is worthy of my trust. Rorschach muttered in his heart, obviously like a mirror, he knew everything very well. Although Ultron knew many secrets in the dark sea of the internet, he was poisoned by the Black Sea. But obviously, in terms of playing with the mind, he was still too young. No matter how many stories he had read, in the end, what he read on paper would always be shallow. After guessing that it was almost done, Rorschach stood up and looked behind him. Not at Wanda, but at on the wall behind this desk, there is a world map. It is the world map that Rorschach sees. Once Ultron's body is finished, we start action. Wanda, do you know what I am going to do next? Wanda was very decisive and shook her head directly. Can't guess it at all. Luo. Shaw smiled and then said. Although we have captured a Hydra base, we must stay awake. The Hydra warriors in this base cannot be used by us. The only people we can really use are you, me, Quicksilver, Ultron, and the Hulk, who is in an uncertain state. The full number is only 4.5. With this absolute disadvantage in numbers, it is difficult to overturn the behemoth America. Wanda asked slightly hesitantly, so, can the decapitation tactic be used? Rorschach affirmed this. It can be used. Of course this trick can be used, but treating the symptoms rather than the root cause. If you want to completely crush this behemoth, can you just behead the government members in the White House and then behead some business giants to make this empire collapse? Wanda thought for a long time, and finally shook her head slowly. I'm afraid, there is no such effect. Every position in Beifeng's official residence is like a radish or a hole. As many radishes are pulled out, there will be as many radishes trying to fill the holes. Moreover, America has always had a tradition of shutting down. Even if the White House is shut down, it will not affect the operation of America as usual. It is as if it is the same whether there is a government or not. And those businessmen who should hang street lights. Speaking of the giants in the business world, Wanda was silent. America's crocodile is truly a crocodile in the world. Those guys are very difficult to find when they are hidden. Under a surprise attack, it is easy to behead 1 or 2, and it is not impossible to behead a dozen or so. But amid the turmoil, what about the rest? Is it a game of whack-a-mole? Sokovia's oil was accompanied by blood, and finally ship after ship was converted into banknotes and turned into numbers in the bank. But the funny thing is, no one can figure out who actually made the money and how many people came to share it. Luo Shaw sneered, and told a cruel fact with full mockery. You know that the oil consortium is eating human blood steamed buns behind the scenes, but who is eating it, and who is stained with blood in each joint of America? All of this, Wanda, with the help of you and Quicksilver, you can't find out even a single bit of his ability. But Wanda was already said to be desperate. As soon as I heard this, but I immediately raised my head and felt hope in my heart. Looking into Wanda Key's eyes, Luo Shaw looked at her calmly and said calmly and firmly. It's just that people can't find it out. If they find out, they will be shot 8 times in the back and commit suicide. But as long as Ultron is given enough time, he can sort out all the lines in this interest chain and send all enemies to the black beheading list. This is Ultron's ability, this is the power of artificial intelligence charm. Wanda felt excited when she heard this, and her eyes showed expectation. She admitted that she had underestimated Ultron before, and she did not expect that this seemingly simple and talking mechanical head could possess such power. With the help of Ultron, can all those guys be brought to justice? Rorschach was noncommittal and gave an affirmative reply. Pretty much, it's just a matter of making a hit list and then carrying out a beheading plan. A large consortium may involve as few as hundreds of thousands of people, and some large multinational groups may involve millions of people. The bottom workers, who make up the vast majority, must naturally be excluded. If the middle-level leaders are to be eliminated, it can range from a few thousand to tens of thousands. They must be killed. No matter how well-funded or numerous the group is, basically died suddenly and became paralyzed. Rorschach said very plain words. It probably meant the same thing as squeezing a few ants to death. But Wanda was a little surprised by this number. Thousands of people, or even more, tens of thousands of people. This order of magnitude, is it too much? Beheading a few people is normal, and it is not unacceptable to behead dozens or even hundreds of people. But beheading thousands of people, beheading tens of thousands. Is this still beheading? This should be called the Great Purge, the massacre. Luo Xia did not take it seriously and continued calmly. Of course, so many people need to be killed. Think about the innocent civilians who have died in the wars in Sokovia over the years. What kind of astronomical number would that be? If you want to completely paralyze such a large multinational conglomerate, you have to carry out a major purge with thunderous means to completely eradicate it, otherwise, it will be able to resume operations after a few months of shutdown. Wanda has been receiving professional training in the Hydra base for a long time, and she doesn't know much about people's livelihood. But it is difficult for her to understand those monopoly industries. Hydra has conducted in-depth research in this area. For Hydra, after half of the personnel in a base are purged, only follow-up personnel can be replenished, then there will be no problems in the operation of the Hydra base. Those big consortiums may not be able to do what Hydra does. The order is prohibited, but on the other hand, it is not impossible for them to recover faster with less losses. Taking into account the situation of Hydra, Wanda said about this possibility that Rorschach said, there was a little more recognition. However, Rorschach's words did not end there. He spoke again in a faint voice. Wanda, do you think this is over? Even if we kill thousands of people and completely paralyze Sokovia's oil monopoly, do you think this matter will be over? Do you think there are no more vampires lying on top of the people of Sokovia? Wrong. Big mistake. As long as America remains the world's overlord, Sokovia's suffering will never end. Rorschach looked indifferent and told the extremely cruel reality. Get rid of an oil giant, and America's next giant will come over. As long as they can continue sucking blood in Sokovia, these vampires will never stop. Unless, completely making them unable to be vampires. Wanda suddenly raised her head and looked at Rorschach. Ming-Chi was frightened by Rorschach's words. She was so distraught at this time that she didn't know what to do. Her hometown, which had suffered so much, had been bullied and squeezed to this point. Such a situation, but she was helpless. Her biological parents, her fellow villagers and friends had all died under the gunfire, but she could do nothing. Such suffering, how long will Sokovia have to endure? Is it true that as long as overlords like America who are keen on exploitation still exist on the earth, small and weak countries like Sokovia will always be bullied? Wanda looked at Rorschach, her eyes gradually becoming firmer. She finally figured out many things, and figured out the source of why Sokovia was suffering so much now. She spoke softly and asked, yes or no, as long as America disappears from the earth, the world will be peaceful. Luo Xia replied in a deep voice. As long as hegemony still exists in this world, plunder and oppression will always exist. On today's earth, the synonym for hegemony is America. Wanda, I am very glad that you can realize this, recognize the reality, and know that killing one or two consortiums will not change anything. Only by destroying that hegemonic country can the world truly be changed. Wanda lowered her head. So what do we do? One or two multinational companies are still confident to kill it. But facing such a behemoth, only the better you understand the other party, the more you will know how thick the other party's health bar is. Such a monster as really the four of them can half a small team be destroyed. Do you think too highly of her and too highly of Quicksilver? Rorschach could see the powerlessness in Wanda's heart. But he was not discouraged, instead a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, said firmly and confidently. No matter how difficult something is, if you don't do it, you will never be able to do it. And now, I already have a plan in mind. He turned and looked at the wall. On the wall of this room, there was a huge and clear map of the world. Rorschach stepped forward, stretched out his right hand, and slowly traced his fingertips across the Pacific Ocean. Finally, Luo Sha, we were on 4 islands that were winding like insects. Wanda naturally knew the map, so she was a little confused when she saw this. Yingzhou, Luo. Sha shook his head and corrected. No, what I am referring to is not Yingzhou, but America's military base in Yingzhou, which is also one of the largest and most populous military bases where America is deployed abroad. Directly attack America's mainland with just a few of us. Haha, Wanda, I'm not that crazy. Directly attacking Aramco's homeland is currently unrealistic. But for these overseas bases of America, with our power, we can easily eradicate them with our hands. Wanda vaguely understood Rorschach's intention. Rorschach, what do you mean? First slowly eradicate these foreign military bases, and finally take action on the mainland. Luo. Sha nodded and continued in a cold voice. That's almost the meaning, but the main goal is to spread panic and let fear begin to spread in major military bases. I want the soldiers in those military bases to be frightened and flee without a fight when they hear my name. The two solid cornerstones of this hegemonic country are called military hegemony and the other is called financial hegemony. I want Ultron to cause a financial storm in America. Destroy their financial system. And I will take matters into my own hands to dismantle his military hegemony and completely overthrow this fool who likes to suck blood and squeeze blood. In this way, Rorschach's hatred can be eliminated. What kind of revenge is killing a few people? If Rorschach wants to play, he must play big. Otherwise, I'm sorry that before he was in the Hydra laboratory, he was still in America's military laboratory. He has stayed in there for so many years. That was the source of the disaster that caused him to look like this. Sokovia, Baron Strucker's secret base, to be precise, a former military base. At this time, with the Baron's castle as the center, everything within a radius of dozens of miles looked like it had been devastated. Especially the core area of the explosion was completely destroyed, and even half of its original appearance could not be seen. It would be a complete joke to try to find some special clues from such an explosion scene. Within hours of the explosion, the area was filled with S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. After confirming the battle report on the front line, S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Nick Fury waved his hand, and he must find Natasha and Bruce Banner if he wants to see people dead or corpses. Nick Fury doesn't have much trust in the Hulk, and sees him more as a weapon. A decisive person like him sees things from a very clear perspective. Bruce Banner and the Hulk are two different people in his eyes. The former is worthy of trust, while the latter can only be trusted to a limited extent. But Natasha was different. Before becoming an Avenger, Natasha had already joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and became one of the agency's top agents, and was Nick Fury's most capable agent. Whether it is Natasha's past achievements or her current identity, Nick Fury must find her. At least, an explanation is needed. S.H.I.E.L.D. is incredibly efficient. Without the deliberate obstruction of Hydra's insiders, the work efficiency and capability level of Snake and S.H.I.E.L.D. are unparalleled and the most outstanding in the world. And now, it's not just Nick Fury who wants to know what happened at Straker military base. Hydra also wants to know what happened here. Hydra could understand that the base was breached and even destroyed. But they couldn't figure out why, after repelling the Avengers' offensive, the base blew itself up instead. After repelling the Avengers, what happened in Strucker's base? After working for several hours, a preliminary report appeared on Nick Fury's desk. Those guys in the analysis room suspected that the self-destruction was to destroy the corpses and bury evidence. After a few glances, Nick Fury threw the report out and shouted angrily. Are you kidding me? The Hydra base has already been discovered, so what evidence is there to hide? Are there not enough people who have died at the hands of these Hydras that there is no need to destroy their bodies and eliminate all traces? Tell those analysts that if they are all such idiots, then get out of here. Don't stay here and talk nonsense. Nick Fury finally said angrily. Even if you give me a report that suspects another alien invasion and ultimately destroys and detonates the base, I think it is more credible. Tony Stark was also staying here at this time. After listening to these analysis reports, he shook his head disdainfully. I've told you before, there are bad people in your team. I asked Jarvis to build a data model early on. Based on the possibility of model feedback, I initially judged that it was internal strife. The Hydra named Rorschach eventually became an enemy of the other Hydras, causing the explosion. Nick Fury couldn't let Tony Stark mock his own operators. He continued to ask. Then how do you explain why he destroyed this base and then walked away? According to the information currently available, this Rorschach has definitely taken control of the base with his strength. Such a military base is easy to defend and difficult to attack. The holding time must be divided at least by quarter. There is no need for him to destroy this base. And if he subconsciously has the means to be controlled by Hydra. So talking about internal strife is naturally out of the question. Nick Fury snorted softly and asked. Tony, doesn't your big data model tell you why such a result occurs? Tony turned his head away and replied angrily. I'm not Hydra, how do I know what they're thinking? At least as far as the Hydras I've seen so far, I haven't found many normal people. At this time, Hawkeye's voice came from the communicator, stopping the two people from arguing. You two, let's not argue at this critical moment. I have made some new discoveries here, which may help us find Natasha. Tony stood up suddenly. Okay, I'll come right away. Where? Nick Fury also answered. I'll just pass by. He has been staying in the command room, not getting any useful information, and he is very anxious. Seeing the message from Hawkeye, Nick Fury also has great trust in Hawkeye. Hawkeye set a direction. Those who could move were all standing up and going. Those who could not move were all lying on the hospital bed, recovering from their injuries and unable to get involved with other things. The Eagle Eye traced the traces all the way, and had followed the track traces to find the place where the train last stopped. This place was far away from the center of the base explosion, so it did not suffer much impact, and most of the original landforms were left behind. Eagle Eye even found wheel marks nearby, but no train. A figure fell from the sky and landed next to Hawkeye. None other than Iron Man Tony Stark. At this time, of the original 6-member Avengers team, 2 were seriously injured and bedridden, 2 were captured, and the only ones who could still move freely were Iron Man and Hawkeye. Seeing his comrades arriving, Hawkeye didn't hide anything and told everything he had discovered. Finally, he expressed confusion. I found a wheel mark nearby. It's very new. It should be the mark left today. I suspect that this route is the escape route from the explosion at the Hydra base. Those Hydras should be riding some kind of high-speed train. But strangely, I didn't find any traces of a vehicle. Eagle Eye finally expressed anxiously. If she is still alive, it is very likely that she is also on this route, because only this escape route has been discovered so far. The escape route was discovered, but where are the escape tools? Tony frowned, looked around, then sprayed flames from the soles of his feet and flew into the air. Soon, he made a new discovery and landed. I know they hid the train there. This train weighs at least 2 to 3 tons, and it is obviously not something that ordinary people can shake. But considering the terrifying power Rorschach had shown before, everything makes sense. After sinking to the bottom of the water, water was poured into the carriage, and the weight was even more incalculable. It is no wonder that Tony Stark still had a very difficult time fishing it out with the help of his suit. After Tony dragged the train to the shore, he let go of his hands and gasped, and said in a bad breath. The guys who came out of the passage threw the vehicle into the water when they finally left. It was obvious that they were very eager to eliminate all traces. Hawkeye just nodded slightly when he heard this and didn't say anything. After waiting for the water in the train compartment to subside further, Hawkeye walked into the compartment and inspected it carefully. Tony also walked in. Hawkeye looked back. He glanced at it and said with great certainty. If she is still alive, then even if her whole body is tied up and unable to move freely, she must still have a way to send us some messages and stay. This information may not be very important, but at least it can prove that she is still alive. It was only a few hours before and after, and such a big change happened. Eagle Eye didn't think Natasha could find out any information. But at least, he hoped to have this information. Because this means that Natasha is still alive. Tony nodded silently, but his expression was a little gloomy. In his heart, he actually didn't have much hope anymore. He knew very well how strong the captain and Thor were. In the end, they both ended up the same. So miserable, one has a broken hand, and the other is seriously injured and bedridden, unable to move. Although Natasha is a former top agent. Found it. Hawkeye's exclamation interrupted Tony Stark's pessimistic thoughts. Tony couldn't help but blinked, a little surprised, and then it was a surprise. What is it? Is it the message Natasha left? He walked up and couldn't help but ask. Hawkeye nodded heavily and presented the object in his palm to Tony's eyes. It was a very small piece of cloth, about the size of a fingernail, and could probably fit on this piece of cloth. Saw some subtle words. Eagle Eye opened his mouth to explain. Natasha is the top agent in the world. She has very adequate measures to deal with various emergencies. For example, in the current situation, after being caught by an enemy suspected of being Hydra, it is definitely impossible to use all the electronic instruments on her body. Iron items will also be detected, but this kind of native fabric cannot. Problems in these aspects. Such size. Unless those Hydras have their eyes fixed on Natasha at all times, it would be impossible to detect her just by blinking or turning their head. Tony looked at the small piece of fabric and was surprisingly shocked. What information can this piece of cloth the size of a fingernail leave behind? Hawkeye glanced at Tony, his eyes obviously not friendly. Tony, you underestimate Natasha and you underestimate me. Of course, you are right, there are indeed not many words that can be written on this piece of cloth, but Natasha and I have long trained a unique way of abbreviation, which can express as much meaning as possible with as few words as possible. Next, keep quiet and let me take a good look. With that said, Hawkeye casually took out a portable magnifying glass from his pocket and began to decipher it. When Nick Fury arrived in a hurry, what he saw was Hawkeye holding a magnifying glass, eyes wide open, mumbling something. What's this? Nick Fury saw what Hawkeye was holding in his hand and already had a guess, but he was not sure yet. Hawkeye replied, the information Natasha left behind. Nick Fury frowned. Have you finished deciphering it? Eagle Eye replied with some uncertainty. It's roughly finished, but there's a message in it that I'm a little unsure of. Then Hawkeye explained, I can confirm that there are two pieces of information about the abbreviations left by Natasha. In the first piece of information, Natasha left the abbreviation of her name. WD, J, MF, if I remember correctly, it should be the abbreviation of Wanda Django Maximoff, but I don't have this person in my memory. I don't know why Natasha left this name. Tony quickly entered the name into Jarvis's database, and asked Jarvis to start analyzing and searching, while asking, what about the second piece of information? Eagle Eye replied, that's a sentence, but when Natasha left the message, she might have been in a hurry and didn't even have enough time for one or two letters, so there was an ending missing. According to my understanding, this sentence can be deciphered as, enemies include Hydra and. Obviously, there is still half a sentence, or an ending. Chapter 51. The group of people looked at me and I looked at you, but they were all a bit confused. Of the two deciphered pieces of information, the first one is relatively easy to say, and no one can tell whether it is right or wrong. But this latter one, are you sure Natasha didn't even have time to leave one more letter? Or is it that you are already unfamiliar because you haven't deciphered the code in this area for a long time? Tony couldn't help but ask. The main reason was that the sentence deciphered by Hawkeye was too confusing. What does enemies include Hydra and mean? Either there is a designated noun after it, or it is let's just settle it at once, without the single word, and. Anyway, everyone knows that Hydra must be the enemy. As for other hostile forces, just slowly explore them in other free time. Instead, but there is such an extra letter, and the meaning is completely different. It makes people feel very entangled, and there is no way to ignore it. Hawkeye's face is cold, his eyes are serious, and he has no intention of joking. Nick Fury coughed softly, speaking for Hawkeye. Tony, don't question the professionalism of a top agent. Maybe you are the best in terms of technology and creativity, but when it comes to the professional skills of agents, I will always believe in the level of Natasha and Hawkeye, and they will never regress. Maybe when they get older, it's hard to say, time is killing people the most. But right now, Hawkeye is at the peak of his physical capabilities, so don't question it. Nick Fury took the stage for Hawkeye, and then his tone became more tactful and gentle. And that's a good thing, isn't it? No matter what information this piece of cloth conveyed, its existence meant one thing: Natasha was still safe, and she was not affected by the big explosion. In response to Nick Fury's words, Tony couldn't help but nodded. You're right, Fury, there's no better news for us. The relationship between the 6 first-generation Avengers is extremely deep. Not only are they comrades fighting side by side, they are also close personal friends on weekdays, and they are the most sincere best friends. Even the Hulk. Well, maybe they are still wary of Hulk now, but they all have absolute trust in Bruce Banner. The life and death of the two people were uncertain before, and Tony and the others were somewhat unable to remain calm and irrational. And now, Natasha is still alive. There is no better news than this. Nick Fury, Tony and others stopped arguing because of this good news, and they were all silent for a while. Until Jarvis's mechanical voice rang through the flood season, breaking the silence. Through the support of the Joint Defense Database and the S.H.I.E.L.D. large database, I found some information records about Wanda. As a side-by-side comparison, there are no errors in the intelligence messages deciphered by Mr. Eagle Eye. This is a confirmation of Hawkeye's professionalism. Tony's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he hurriedly said, "Let's talk quickly. Who is the name Natasha left behind, and how is it related to today's events?" Jarvis only obeyed Tony's orders. Occasionally he would take Pepper's orders to heart. At this time, after receiving Tony's order, he said bluntly, "Then enter key information such as Wanda Django Maximoff and Sokovia into the database, and after keyword search and verification, a person's identity is determined." Jarvis used a screen projection method to project an illusory picture onto the ground. What was on the screen was an identity document. But the figure on the document looked like a little girl of 7 or 8 years old. This little girl, the girl's face was dirty, and there was unconcealable panic and fear in her eyes, and she felt like she was being frightened. However, although her appearance was a bit dirty, it was obvious that this little girl had a good foundation and had a kind of she is naturally beautiful, and she will definitely be a great beauty when she grows up. Tony scanned the identity information with a few glances, and immediately frowned. Because in the identity introduction of the little girl on the screen, it was written Dow, refugee from Sokovia, parents missing. Jarvis introduced mechanically. The girl on the screen is called Wanda. After her refugee status was confirmed 15 years ago, she was protected by the Joint Defense Organization in a resettlement site to prevent her from accidentally dying in the war in Sokovia at that time. The whereabouts of her parents are unknown, but there is a high probability that he has died in the war. During the war in Sokovia in those years, there were too many such refugees whose whereabouts were unknown. This Wanda also has an older brother who is 1 year older and is also taken into the resettlement site. His name is Pietro Django Maximoff. According to the Joint Defense Database, the brother and sister only lived in the settlement for a year, and then their whereabouts were unknown. Since then, there has been no news about them. According to the age records at that time, now, Wanda is 22 years old and Pietro is 23. This is not over yet. Jarvis continued. There is also some knowledge and opinions of the Joint Defense Resettlement Point about the brothers and sisters. Although it is not much, it is absolutely guaranteed to be true. Photos of Quicksilver as a child also appeared on the screen, with Wanda on the left and right in front of everyone. But just like now, the siblings didn't look very similar when they were young. According to the few sentences left at the Joint Defense Settlement, they learned that the brother and sister claimed to be twins. However, there were errors in the records recorded by civilian personnel, and considering the similarity in appearance between the brother and sister, they still maintained their identity. Judgment based on original data. If the conclusion of the twins is correct, then the siblings are both around 22 years old this year. The officers and soldiers at the Joint Defense Settlement wrote in the record book that the brother and sister were usually very quiet and not at all lively and active as they should be at this age. They behave very sadly on a daily basis. Children aged 7 or 8 are no longer at an age where they don't understand anything. When their parents' whereabouts are unknown, and they themselves survived after being admitted to a refugee settlement, even a child may not be able to do it. Go play carefree. Several people listened to Jarvis's introduction, and they were all a little silent. They were not fools. After a little contact with the context and the current situation in Sokovia, they can probably think of something very pessimistic. It's an accident. The whereabouts are unknown, which is generally synonymous with accidental death. Nick Fury said expressionlessly. With such an experience, it makes perfect sense that the twins were bewitched by Hydra and eventually became Hydra. Now that we know their names and identities, we may be able to learn more about what happened to them in the Hydra base through this aspect. Eagle Eye said. With Jarvis' ability, he should be able to build a data model and roughly determine what the twins will look like when they grow up. Jarvis replied. Yes, I can do it, but I can't be 100% accurate, but 90% similarity is no problem. At this point, Jarvis stopped talking. He was waiting for Tony Stark's order to be issued. In the final analysis, Hawkeye is Hawkeye. Unless Tony authorizes it, the only person who can really order Jarvis is Tony, the Master. Build the model, as Clinton said. This matter is indeed important. Tony gave an order and asked Jarvis to complete the task. Then he looked at Nick Fury with an unkind expression. Judging from the current actual situation, it is true that the twins have joined Hydra, but Director Fury, do you want to see what you are talking about? Why did they join Hydra? You don't know anything about this, do you? Although I have not learned about it in depth, from what I have heard, the war in Sokovia and the transnational oil consortium established on this land after the war subsided are all inseparable from North America. Nick Fury looked back without showing any signs of weakness and looked at Tony Stark. Finally, he took a step back and turned to leave, but he also left a few words. Tony, if you talk about these things, then I have to remind you. What was the main business of Stark Group before it transformed into an energy group? The local armed forces in Sokovia have a large number of firearms produced by the Stark Group. Although that is what happened in the past, it has finally happened, and it is a fact that no one can change. I still have a lot of work to deal with, so I'll take the first step. You are looking for Natasha, and I am also looking for Natasha. Our goals are the same. If there are any clues, we can definitely communicate with each other. The battle will not be over like this time, S.H.I.E.L.D. It's long overdue. After saying that, Nick Fury left without looking back. As he said, as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he has a lot to do. Now that he knows that Natasha is still alive, he feels a big pain in his heart. The stone can fall. Although she was caught, with Natasha's ability, there will be no problem. Escaping from prison is too common for her. Only Tony and Hawkeye were left looking at each other. Looking at each other, it is obvious that the atmosphere is a bit stiff. Although the 6-person team in the first generation of Avengers are a team, there is still no way to eliminate the complicated relationships in all aspects. For example, Natasha and Hawkeye, who were born in S.H.I.E.L.D. Between Tony and when Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., gets into a dispute, it's hard not to wonder whose side Hawkeye is on. Nick Fury returned to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s ship, but he did not start work immediately. Instead, he sat on the chair in a daze and was in a daze for a long time. On his desk, there is also a video that Tony transmitted earlier. The content is exactly the process of the head-on confrontation between the Avengers and Rorschach, which is used to analyze Rorschach's weaknesses. This is truly first-hand information, and there is no way Jarvis could leak it. If it is leaked, then there can only be another problem on Nick Fury's side. Nick Fury watched the video blankly for a long time, but his eyes were a little erratic. He was a little unsure, but he had to recall one thing. As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he must avoid suspicion regarding military matters. But if something happens to the military, small things may not reach his ears, and big things will be difficult to get past him. Nick Fury vaguely recalled that in a secret laboratory of the military, there was an incident of experimental subject defection a few years ago, and thousands of people were killed and injured before it finally stopped. The most important thing is that the protagonist in the military incident has certain similarities with the current Hydra humanoid weapon. Not that they look alike. Nick Fury didn't know the secrets that the military deliberately concealed. Mainly because both sides are researching large-scale weapons, or are they transitioning to human experiments? More importantly, Hydra's experiment seems to be successful, but the military side has failed. Not to mention that the military was also infiltrated by Hydra. All the confidential data in the military laboratories were stolen, and the experimental data obtained with great difficulty were all used as a wedding dress for Hydra. With this thought in mind, Nick Fury finally dialed the phone number of an old friend in the military, ready to inquire about this matter. Then he stood up suddenly, his eyes as wide as copper bells. What? You said that the experimental subjects who defected back then were not captured and brought to justice, but were killed on the spot. And because the experimental subjects had already escaped into the sea, your military first washed the ground with a wave of missiles, and finally threw a mushroom egg into the shallow sea. Nick Fury's eyes widened. Are you sure? Was that experimental subject really 100% killed? The other side of the microphone replied. So can we still be 100% sure? They were all blown up to the point where there were no bones left, and not a single scrap was left. Reason told him that the experimental subjects who defected from the military laboratory had definitely been completely killed by the military's generosity. After all, those are mushroom eggs. It is not an antique from the Second World War, but a more powerful version after the new millennium. It is a terrifying killing weapon that ranks at the top of the list of killing weapons of human civilization no matter what. Not to mention being listed as the main target by mushroom eggs, even if it is only affected, even if it is blocked by seawater, it will definitely end with no bones left. The defected experimental subject in the military laboratory died without a complete body no matter what, and there was no trace left. This is the unanimous judgment of all military personnel, and no one has any objection. Before today, Nick Fury had heard about this incident, and he had always thought so, but after watching what happened on the battlefield in Sokovia, and the performance of the Hydra experimental subject named Rorschach, a shadow appeared in Nick Fury's mind, lingering and following him like a shadow. My old friend, I am very interested in this matter. Can you tell me more details? For example, that experimental subject who defected should have had his own name before he became an experimental subject, right? Hamilton, do you know anything about this? Nick Fury suppressed the throbbing in his heart and asked calmly. He had already heard that the old friend on the other side of the phone was in a drunken state. As we all know, drinking is always better than being sober. Down, it's easier to reveal some secrets. Belch. The old friend across the phone, General Hamilton, burped. He didn't become suspicious, but rather puzzled. It's been many years, why do you care about these old things again? This experimental plan had extremely high confidentiality standards at the time. After the failure of the plan, it was not leaked much, but was completely sealed and shelved. But I do know some inside information. I don't know the name of the experimental subject, but the old guys in charge of this aspect, when talking about this matter, called the experimental subject, weapons of war. Nick Fury breathed a sigh of relief, but then felt a little regretful. A title like, weapon of war, cannot be used for definite purposes. More often than not, it is used as a surrogate name. The black braised egg thought for a while and continued to ask. As far as I know, the experimental war weapons project is a long-lasting project that has been carried out for many years. The experimental subject did not defect before, why did he defect later? Is it because the long period of guarding has caused the guards to slack off, or is the guard ineffective? Is there an internal flaw? What Nick Fury meant in the second half of his sentence was that he suspected that a mole had infiltrated the military experimental base. Of course, this kind of thing cannot be said openly. After all, the old friend opposite the microphone is a serving general. He said this as a joke. The latter's face, so Nick Fury used euphemisms. However, General Hamilton was in a drunken state and did not hear these subtexts at all, but answered bluntly. Where are all these messy things? In the final analysis, the experimental subject went berserk. Those mad scientists made the experimental subject so powerful that it was still out of control. Those scientists were all madmen. Following Hamilton's narration, Nick Fury also learned more about this matter. It turns out that the military experimental subject is actually an artificial, super soldier. At the beginning, His strength was only about the same as Captain Amy, and he might even be stronger. Not as good as Captain. But then, those mad scientists in the military laboratory began to use it on the experimental subjects. A living super soldier who can be slaughtered by them, isn't this the best research material? No one knows how many experiments those mad scientists in the group have done on the experimental subjects, and they have used all kinds of immature experimental ideas in their heads on the experimental subjects. Speaking of the last thing at this time, Hamilton seemed to be sober, and his voice became more serious. From the beginning, the experimental body had a tendency to be unstable, but it was generally controllable. But 6 years ago, that is, after the gamma-ray experiment, the subject was completely out of control, he completely went berserk. That experimental subject completely turned into a monster. Nick Fury keenly grasped the key point. What did you say? Gamma-ray experiment? Hamilton responded in a deep voice. Yes, it is the gamma-ray experiment. The gamma rays produced by the Hulk and used on the experimental subjects are the largest emitters in the world, with power far exceeding that of the Hulk. That one. It has been 10 years since the birth of the Hulk. After the military spent some time and learned how the Hulk was born, they naturally had some thoughts. The military was divided into 2 factions at that time. One faction was directly with the help of the Hulk's blood, the Hulk is mass-produced. The final result of this faction is abomination. The other faction intends to create the Hulk directly from the source, and even create a monster more powerful than the Hulk. Gamma-ray experimental subject. There is no doubt that the military experimental subject is the master of this faction. Nick Fury's eyes were wide open. He must be frightened and frightened. Why did Hulk behave so strangely when facing Rorschach? Why was Hulk unwilling to take action against Rorschach, and even stayed away from the battlefield? The trust they have in Hulk is definitely not as much as that of Bruce Banner. But after all, they are comrades fighting side by side, and they are familiar faces. Hulk naturally has no good impression of Nick Fury. If he doesn't care about Nick Fury being beaten up, it makes perfect sense. But watching Thor, Steve and others being beaten, it was impossible to remain indifferent. In the end, Hulk did nothing, chose not to help each other, and left the battlefield directly. Nick Fury was puzzled by this before. Now, he seemed to vaguely understand the reason, but for some things, not understanding is sometimes more beneficial to himself than understanding. Nick Fury is sweating all over his back now. So, what about that transmitter? Is it still in the hands of the military? Gamma-ray emitters are not too difficult to assemble, but there are not many high-power emitters that can actually work in the world. The reason is that the scope of application of this thing is a bit narrow. The military has to specially customize it. Only one will be produced when there is an order, and counterfeiting is more expensive than ordinary ships. Hamilton replied. It had been destroyed a long time ago. When the experimental subject went berserk, the transmitter was destroyed as well. That thing is worth a lot of money. Our military still has a few gamma-ray emitters, but the combined power is not as powerful as that one. Hamilton said with a bit of panic in his voice. According to those mad scientists, the gamma-ray emitter that created the Hulk was not even 1/10 as powerful as the destroyed emitter. The birth of the Hulk was more based on various chances and coincidences. But the appearance of that experimental subject was a real accumulation of various resources and energy. It is also because of this that he is terrifyingly strong, far more powerful than the Hulk, and the destruction caused by his rampage is so terrifying. In the report I got after the war, the roof of the entire experimental base was ripped off on the spot and completely destroyed. The condition of the experimental subject at that time could not be described as an experimental subject at all. It was a monster, a complete monster. He went on a killing spree on the way to escape, killing and injuring at least thousands of people. The most frightening thing is that he still maintained his wisdom and rationality, unlike the Hulk who went crazy and became angry about something. No matter what. Hamilton seemed to be caught up in the fearful memories of the past, and his voice became a little trembling. That monster caused thousands of casualties along the way, and this was just caused by him casually. His real purpose was to escape to the coastal area, hoping to gain complete freedom through the waterway. The experimental subject has turned into a monster, but he still retains his wisdom and is extremely hostile to our military and even the entire country. Nick Fury broke into a cold sweat when he heard this, but when he heard this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Whoever was treated like this must be full of hostility. There is no doubt that this could be the experimental subject himself. Question. Of course Nick Fury would not dwell on this sentence. He complained in his heart and continued to listen silently. Hamilton continued. If such a hostile monster really ran away and regained his freedom, then we might not even be able to sleep peacefully in the future. Therefore, the military's decision at that time was to pursue the case while requesting permission from higher-ups. General Hamilton is already at the top of the military. Nick Fury knows full well that if he continues to request authority from above, it will involve the top level, and he will already be at the helm of the entire country. Finally, we obtained permission to launch a nuclear bomb, and before the monster escaped into the sea, we blasted it into the tiniest particles on the coastline, completely eradicating this hidden danger. No matter what kind of monster it is, no matter what kind of enemy it is, under the righteous sanctions of mushroom eggs, they will all be treated equally. After telling the whole incident, Hamilton seemed to have poured out the fear in his heart. He quickly poured another sip of wine into his mouth and muttered while drinking. Fury, you don't know the look in that monster's eyes. How resentful and angry he must be to have that look in his eyes. I couldn't sleep well for a month after I went back, and it took a psychiatrist to relieve my symptoms. Hamilton also said before that he had nothing to do with this matter. But as he spoke, he was exposed. Judging from his tone, he was by no means an accidental hearer, but he was the one who worked on the war weapons project, one of the senior leaders. Nick Fury couldn't help but ask, "Are you 100% sure that you killed the experimental subject? There is no residual tissue left from the body. Do you want to see the body when you were alive?" Hamilton snorted. "Throw away the mushroom eggs, what else is left? No matter how strong that monster is, it's still just flesh and blood, not indestructible alien metal. Besides, if it were not confirmed that he was dead, not only would I not be able to sleep well for a month, but many, many people would be unable to sleep well." Nick Fury became silent after hearing this. After a long time, he asked, "Hamilton, I need more detailed file information. Regarding this plan, I need all the information related to the experimental subjects." He specifically emphasized, "This is most likely related to Hydra, so I have to be cautious." Hamilton didn't take this trick, and he said drunkenly, "There's no point asking me about this, you'll have to apply to higher-ups." Although the war weapons project failed, a lot of experimental data are very precious and are all included in top-secret files. Although you are the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the military will not care whether your status as director will be released to you. This status may still be a burden. The military is a military. S.H.I.E.L.D. seems to include many things, but in a broad sense it is more like a spy intelligence organization. The incompatibility between the two is natural, and it is even deliberately done by higher-ups. This is how it is arranged. Balance the forces of all parties. Nick Fury also understood the difficulty and looked serious. "I understand. I will apply for the details of this plan. It concerns Hydra, and I must get it." Nick Fury paused at the end, and finally did not speak to remind his old friend. If his guess is true, then you really don't have to sleep peacefully for the rest of your life. He has no need to rest. With his current physical condition, he can do it without sleeping for a month, it doesn't matter. I originally wanted to close my eyes and relax for a while, which would be regarded as a rest. But after all, I still feel itchy and want to destroy a few military bases just to relieve my boredom. America has military bases all over the world, the difference is just more and less. Naturally, there are some in Northern Europe. I just have nothing to do, so I went to raid a few. Rorschach murmured, and then he had a plan. If the reason why the military bases that were targeted next were to be bulldozed was so simple, he would probably cry on the spot. America arranged overseas military bases naturally come in different sizes. The next stage goal in Rorschach's Isingjo base is one of the best. The base has more than tens of thousands of armed personnel and is equipped with all kinds of cutting-edge weapons, ranking among the best in the world. With a configuration of this size, except for the joint defense against cosmic powers such as the Five Gangsters and Third Brother Bang Bang, it is basically no problem to destroy any country at will. In fact, everyone knows who Chen Bingyingzhou is guarding against with such heavy force. However, such a large base with tens of thousands of people consumes countless money, food and materials, and causes local conflicts that are common. Only an island country without sovereignty like Yingzhou will allow its existence. There are not many large-scale bases like America available overseas. In most overseas military bases, a few thousand people are basically too many, and there are many military bases with 1,800 people. Don't think that a military base with 1,800 people is a very humble order of magnitude. Paired with America's first-class weapons and equipment and combat literacy, when facing the backward armed forces of the Third World, she can directly transform into a god and descend to Earth without any problems. It was this kind of military base that Rorschach targeted. To the locals, they are heavenly soldiers. But for Rorschach, it is no different from bean sprouts. Let's see Luo Sha transformed into Zhongfei, eating bean sprouts as a piece of cake. When Rorschach pulled Quicksilver out of bed, he explained his purpose. Kuai-yin was completely stunned. Didn't he say that the next action was planned to take place 10 days and a half later? Do we still have to wait for Ultron's body? Why did you start taking action that night? Rorschach did not let Wanda keep the secret. It could even be said that he acquiesced or even encouraged it, which made Wanda and Quicksilver angry in advance. Therefore, after learning about Rorschach's general plan, Quicksilver only then was he so surprised. What Luo Sha just said was different from what his sister told him. Luo Sha smiled indifferently. To deal with those large bases with tens of thousands of people, or even to log into America's mainland, you really need to be prepared, and you can't act rashly. But if it's just a small base with a few thousand people, it doesn't matter at all. I can arm the entire base by myself, but there are things I can't do on my own, so I need your help. Then Rorschach explained, I plan to stay in this experimental base for a while before I have a better choice. Therefore, in order to avoid it being exposed, I will choose some targets that are relatively far away in a straight line. Quicksilver, you know, my speed is not slow, but compared with you it is far inferior. The distance of 1,000 miles is just a few breaths for you. The implication is that Kuai-yin's mobility is needed. If the target is locked at a military base thousands of miles away, then the Kalami experimental base will naturally not arouse anyone's suspicion. When Kuai-yin heard this, so that's what happened. He scratched his head, feeling a little worried. So that's it, Boss Luo, I'm very confident in your strength. It's just a small military base with 1,000 or 2,000 people. Although there are fewer people, the threat is not low. Do you want to? The implication is to ask 2 more people to go together, for example, bring Wanda and Hulk, and all go out, treating it as an exercise. From another perspective, it can also be treated as an alternative team-building activity. And I'm still a little worried. This experimental base originally belonged to Hydra. If we leave rashly, will there be any accidents? Rorschach knew very well about Kuai-yin's worries. He smiled and said with relief, this is just a small activity because my hands are itchy in the middle of the night and I can't sleep. I won't disturb your sister. Hulk has not recovered at this time. Let him continue to rest. Just treat it like the 2 of us go out for a walk together. I guess I won't need it for an hour and I'll be back. As for this experimental base, since you can cross 1,000 miles in a few breaths, you can also come back completely in a few breaths. With Ultron watching, that Kalami and the polished Commander Straker can't turn the world upside down. Rorschach had considered everything thoroughly, and Kuai-yin felt at ease. He looked at Rorschach, and he was already convinced. The boss he had just recognized was powerful, an iron-blooded action man, and his ability to do things was simply full value. In the past, when I followed Hydra, there was no hope of revenge. But when I followed Boss Luo, I was a little worried that I would be held back. At night, after a busy day, it was time for everyone to rest. Whether it's the Avengers or S.H.I.E.L.D, there are people who take a break, but there are also people who are always busy, trying to find more clues. But one thing is certain. As the wounded, Saul and Steve must have been lying on the hospital bed early. Steve was quite honest. He followed the doctor's instructions, took his medicines, and kept the suspension bottle hanging. Saul obviously has his own way of doing things. He didn't take injections or medicine, and he didn't pay attention to his broken arm. The current Earth technology has the technology to heal and reconnect a broken arm, but Thor is more confident about Asgard's home technology and is ready to wait until he returns. After that, see what to do. At this time, his focus was more on the fragments of Thor's hammer that were shattered on the ground. After being crushed, the Meow hammer also lost its magic. The intact Meow hammer can only be held and lifted by people it recognizes. But now that the hammer is shattered on the ground, even S.H.I.E.L.D. agents cleaning up the battlefield can pick it up and send it to Thor, making him go crazy. Think on the bright side. At least all the broken pieces of the hammer are found. Steve lay on his side on the hospital bed and comforted. Perhaps it can be resmelted and shaped, and a brand new Thor's hammer will appear again. Saul, however, was not happy. He looked at the fragments of the cabinet with a sense of sadness and anger. She can't go back. Even if she really uses that method to forge a hammer, it won't be the same person she was before. Thor's hammer has spirituality, and that is what makes this hammer truly magical and powerful. Even if it is smelted and cast again, it is no longer the same hammer as before. The dead body turns into a zombie. It can definitely still move, but it is obviously no longer the human being it was before. When Steve heard this, he suddenly fell silent knowingly, no longer provoking Saul's nerves. He could see that Saul was emotionally unstable now. Moreover, he himself was seriously injured and very weak now. It would be good for him to say a few words less. But this night was destined not to be peaceful. Or, after Rorschach truly breaks free from his prison and walks in this world, there may be no such thing as peace and tranquility. Tony Stark broke the silence. He pushed open the door roughly and walked in quickly. Steve looked at his friend in confusion, wondering about the latter's irritability. And Saul was in a bad mood. He turned back to look at Tony with an unkind expression, thinking to himself, "Are you looking for trouble?" Tony was definitely not here to cause trouble. Looking at the two of them, he directly told the reason. "That Rorschach, he appears again." When Thor heard this, his anger suddenly surged up and he said irritably, "Let me go and meet him again. I want to see if he is really made of steel and not afraid of anything." The implication behind the words is not to fight one-on-one, but to prepare, "We will fight you alone." This is normal, after all, he has lost an arm. No matter how reckless and arrogant Thor is, it is impossible to die. Tony looked at She glanced at him and shook her head. "I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. The person showed up 20 minutes ago. A military base on the Nordic border, where he attacked. Then, when I rushed here, he had already bulldozed the military base into ruins, and then disappeared without a trace." Tony took off the player in his hand, placed it steadily on the stage, and then started to play the picture. "All I can bring is the image of Rorschach attacking that base." The video footage is obviously taken from the surveillance system of the military base. The Rorschach in the footage can be said to be going straight. From the moment he appears in the camera, he charges all the way, from the easternmost part of the base, collapsing dozens of walls along the way, charged to the westernmost end of the base, leaving a straight line crossing the north and south among the buildings of this military base. The American soldiers in the base may have been confused at first, but they also realized at this time, a hail of bullets swept over him in an instant, but they couldn't do anything to the Rorschach in the video. With a wave of his hand, he flew aside like wool. An armed helicopter took off, but Rorschach jumped up and grabbed the helicopter's wings, and then smashed into the ground on the spot. Some tanks were also driven out, and then they were grabbed by the barrel, spun 2.5 times on the spot, and thrown to a nearby building, where they died together with a building. See you there with the soldiers in the base, such a monster. In addition, they did not have superheroes like the Avengers to fight against them. After the defense measures were destroyed, there were many people crying for their parents and running away. And Rorschach in the video, for these the deserters didn't care, he was still counting on these deserters to become tigers and spread the panic. He did not kill all the deserters, but waved his hands and demolished one building after another, moving his body. The warm-up action of activating his hands was outstanding and brilliant. After destroying most of the buildings in the base, especially those valuable buildings, he waved to the intact monitor and left, without taking away a cloud. He didn't seem to care at all that his actions were recorded by the surveillance system. He even intentionally spread all of this. Saul watched all of this in silence, and suddenly spoke. His movements. "There are many openings and closings. Not as cautious as when fighting with us," he said uncertainly. He seemed to be more relaxed, or maybe it was because the military base was really not a threat. That's normal. Tony Stark didn't take it seriously. He knew very well that there were no people or weapons that could threaten him in that military base, so naturally he would not be so cautious. A sneer appeared at the corner of Tony's mouth, but it was more like he was mocking himself. Our reputation is too great. After the First World War in New York, everyone knew that we repelled the attack of alien invaders. That Rorschach has never fought with us before, so it makes sense that he would be very cautious when confronting us at the beginning. As for the end, judging from the final result of the battle, it is obvious that reputation has little to do with the outcome of the battle. Saul looked a little embarrassed when he heard Tony's words. The Chitauri who fought in New York were not so much alien invaders as they were luring wolves into the house, and his brother Loki was the leader in that war, and he led the way for the Chitauri. In the end, the world only knew that the Avengers fought off the alien invaders and became famous. But Loki, the source of all this, was unknown to anyone. He was directly tied up by Thor and brought back to Asgard for trial. Thinking of what Loki had done on Earth, Thor suddenly became much more silent, unlike his previous babbling. Thor is so impartial and law-abiding on Earth, and so hard-working in the Avengers, which more or less offsets his merits and demerits. After all, Thor still loves his brother. Ahem, can you find out where they are hiding? Steve asked while coughing on the hospital bed. Tony nodded in approval and replied, I have already gone to do this. The military base Rorschach destroyed was on the coast of northern Europe. My preliminary estimate of his range of activities is 300 kilometers around that military base. I asked Jarvis to pay more attention to all the surveillance systems in this area. If there is any sign of trouble, we will take action immediately. With a distance of 300 kilometers, the area covered by this range is already huge. Steve agreed with this and nodded. However, how could a cautious person like Rorschach be so easy to follow the facts? Leave clues. Tony Stark expanded the search area to 300 kilometers. This is already an extremely wide area. Some small Nordic countries are also this size. Only with the help of Jarvis can we achieve this level. To do pure human vision, even if there are errors and omissions, requires a huge amount of manpower and material resources. However, no matter how careful the search was, it was all in vain. How could Rorschach have foreseen all this since he was thousands of miles away from the beginning? Saul was silent for a long time, but without making a sound, he became famous. He directly addressed the topic. What should we do if we find him? As soon as these words came out, there was a sudden silence in the whole place, and everyone fell into silence. Yes, what should we do if we really find Rorschach? The Avengers went out to find Rorschach to settle accounts. They had settled accounts with Rorschach before. The final result of the fight was not that Rorschach escaped, but that they evacuated. If he found Rorschach and came to his door like this, wouldn't he be destined to die? Saul's question was simple, but it hit the red heart. Everyone was choked and speechless. Although the god of thunder was used to being reckless and casual, he had fought too many battles with the wind and had few opponents along the way. Encountering such a strong enemy at this moment, Thor he also faced up to his own strength and began to think about how to defeat his opponent. Tony was silent for a long time, but gave an answer that was not an answer. Then, you can only take one step at a time. Tony said, we have fought against Rorschach before, and you all know the result of the battle. That guy was as powerful as a monster. In a head-on confrontation, it would be difficult for us to defeat him with just the strength of a few of us, not to mention that Natasha and Hulk are both in his hands. When talking about Hulk, Tony paused for a moment. Because there is now a lot of evidence that Hulk was not captured, but... However, the long-term comradeship made Tony subconsciously judge that Hulk and Natasha were captured alive. We need to search for more clues to find Rorschach's weakness. Hydra cannot silently create a monster from the ground. There must be a process from weak to strong, from which we can explore Rorschach's fatal weakness. Moreover, in the previous battles, there were no large-scale thermal weapons involved. When S.H.I.E.L.D. joins in, perhaps the battle situation will be greatly beneficial to us. Steve nodded slightly when he heard this. That's all. Is this the end? Seeing Rorschach finishing the battle and returning victoriously, Kuayan's eyes widened with an expression of disbelief. It was just a small base, and Kuayin estimated that it would not be able to cause any hindrance to Rorschach. But he did not expect that. It was so simple, just 3 clicks, 5 divided by 2, and everything was done. Luo Sha was not proud, he just nodded lightly and said, "It's just a force of 1,800 people, not equipped with many heavy weapons, and the base's defense system is also very few, making people wonder whether the equipment in the base has been secretly taken out by the base's senior officials to line their own pockets." Kuayin was not surprised, and simply explained 2 sentences. After all, it is a military base on the Nordic border line. This kind of place has been at peace for a long time and cannot be compared with the Asian and African continents. In addition, America has been the #1 in the world for half a century, and no one dares to touch the edge. This laziness is normal. Although Hydra has not officially declared war on America, it has still conducted a lot of investigations in this area. I am very concerned about this aspect, so I also know a lot of secrets. Having said that, Kuayin still couldn't hide his shock. This is a military base after all. And Rorschach went from rushing into the defense line to razing the entire military base to the ground in only 20 minutes and a quarter of an hour. It's just time. Even if there are 1,000 pigs, it's not easy to catch them in one day, right? As a result, the military base of 1,800 people collapsed. Rorschach smiled at this and expressed a slightly profound meaning. Road. This is the herd mentality. When the atmosphere of panic and fear spread throughout various bases, Aramco's military hegemony was no longer stable, but finally shook. When those military soldiers hear my name, they will throw down their armor and fear to become an army, then our goal will be achieved, the building will collapse in just a moment. Kuayin was a little confused when he listened to Rorschach's words and couldn't understand. But he still vaguely understood a truth. We have very few people, but our target is a hegemonic country with hundreds of millions of people. We don't need to use some folk remedies, even if it doesn't accomplish anything big. There are still too few manpower. 4.5, only 4.5. Kuayin muttered, feeling a sigh of relief in his heart. Then he stopped thinking about these long-lasting things, but looked at Rorschach, and then asked. It's only been 20 minutes since it came out. Everything is fine at Kalami Base. Boss Luo, should we strike while the iron is hot and wander around a little longer? Kuayin also felt excited at this time. He had a personal hatred in his heart. When he was a child, his parents disappeared, bombs fell from the sky, and the streets were blown up. The scene seemed like yesterday, right before his eyes. In just 20 minutes, seeing an enemy's military base destroyed in front of his eyes, it was absolutely impossible for Quicksilver not to be excited. Rorschach raised his head and glanced at the sky. There were no stars or moonlight, and it was covered by gloomy dark clouds. The sky and the wind are also rustling. It's a dark and windy night. Luo Sha murmured, then touched the communicator in his pocket and asked. Ultron, what do you think? Ultron's body is still being built in the base, but with Ultron's ability, he can also establish contact with Rorschach with the help of a communicator. This newly destroyed military base was also the result of Ultron's selection. The selected targets are guaranteed not to be related to their current destination. At this moment, Rorschach spoke again, but he asked Ultron for his opinion. Ultron's autonomous authority and freedom of artificial intelligence are evident. Rorschach has already been tested. Ultron's thoughts are also somewhat tentative. Iron Man has Jarvis by his side. Rorschach also has Ultron by his side. The two have some overlap in functionality, but what is certain is that Rorschach will never let him. Ultron only played the role of Jarvis. That was really too much of a talent. And Rorschach's side is now the most short of manpower. Seeing Rorschach asking Ultron first, Quicksilver frowned somewhat. I don't know why. Kuayin felt that he and this Ultron were inherently at odds with each other. He always felt that there was a cold feeling on his chest, as if there was a bullet hole. But he was just unhappy and did not show it. Because he believed in Elisha with his abilities, it is impossible for him to be deceived by Ultron. Chief, and Mr. Quicksilver, I'm afraid this late-night walking and digestion activity will have to stop tonight, and you two will have to come back. Ulchuang's voice came from the communicator, unhurriedly. Rorschach narrowed his eyes, a fierce light revealed. Is it Kurami or Straker who is restless? Ulchuang replied. Both of them were very calm at this time. Under my cover, they didn't even know that the two leaders had left the base. The reason why we need to come back is because of a message from another Hydra base. These various hidden Hydra bases want to get together to hold a meeting, and Kurami is among them. This is also the message just received. After thinking about it, Luo Sha came to understand. During the day, Strack's base was just gone. In the end, he even started the self-destruction process, and almost no message came out. That is a first-class fortress base. Even if it is discovered, it can be defended for several months by sending heavy troops to attack, waiting for a turnaround. The result was just gone. Anyone else would have muttered a few words in their hearts. What happened in Straker's base is no longer the only one the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. are there to track down. Like Hydra, they are looking for information everywhere. As the whole day passed by, there was no news at all. At this time of night, I think we can simply have a meeting with more people to express their opinions, and maybe we can discuss the issue clearly. The message sent to Kurami base roughly means this. Even because of the harmonious relationship between Kurami and Straker, although the Kurami base is small, it is the top priority. Other Hydra executives hope to gain access to it from Kurami, get some inside information. I roughly figured it out. Luo Sha narrowed her eyes and said in a deep voice. Straker's base was easy to defend and difficult to attack, and the defense measures were first-class, solid and reliable. However, before any news came out, he blew himself up. There was also no news about Straker, and no one knew whether he had escaped or not. He came out, but he died in the base as well. Strucker is the person in charge of the base. Even so, the other persons in charge of the Hydra base can't help but judge others by themselves. They feel sad and are particularly frightened and nervous. Kuai-yin also understood and immediately cursed. A group of cowards, when they encounter something, they don't think about how to solve it, but instead they hope to join a group to keep warm. If you follow these cowards, you may never be able to avenge this blood feud in your lifetime. Rorschach did not refute Quicksilver's words, but nodded in approval. Then he spoke again. It is true that they are a group of cowards, but these guys know a lot of things in their minds. If they find out that the Kurami base has changed hands, oh, probably, S.H.I.E.L.D. will come to your door the next day. Let's go, Quicksilver, this matter is indeed important, you have to go back, be careful and don't let Kurami leak any clues. And it's not all bad. If some information can be obtained through this meeting, it will actually be a good thing. As soon as Rorschach and Quicksilver returned to the base, Wanda was already coming to greet them. Without Chuo as the middleman, there is no delay in message transmission. Rorschach, brother, what should we do next? Luo Sha looked calm and replied calmly. Don't panic, there is still some time before the meeting starts, just meet with Nakarami, and then let him go to the meeting, just pretend that we have never been here, this base is the same as usual, and he does what he usually does. Wanda looked sad. Rorschach, my brother and I have been inside Hydra for a long time. We know many things about Hydra, but there are also many things that we don't know. If that Kurami used some code words in the meeting, it is very likely that we would be exposed, but we could not hear the hidden meaning in his words at all. It's not okay not to attend the meeting. As Straker's old friend, it would be even more suspicious for Kurami not to jump out and add insult to injury, but to complain of illness and not come to the meeting. Rorschach laughed loudly when he heard this. Laugh it out. Wanda, this is what you were worried about. This time when I came back, I saw your sad face, and I thought you were thinking about some difficult problem, but it turns out it was just such a trivial matter. Seeing Wanda looking at her, Luo Sha stopped smiling and looked serious. You can't help worrying, but for this kind of thing, you need to find the right expert. We are equivalent to layman, and we can't tell anything by listening. But it doesn't matter. We can't hear it, but someone can. Rorschach sneered and didn't say much. Quicksilver and Wanda looked at each other, but suddenly woke up and said in unison. Straker, let Strucker listen. Rorschach smiled and nodded. He also had this plan in mind. They may not be able to hear these industry slangs of Hydra, but how could Strack not hear it? Let Strack monitor from another room. The most appropriate way. Of course, there is one more thing that needs to be paid attention to, and that is to prevent the Kurami fish from breaking through. You must risk your own life and pass on the information. Rorschach looked at Wanda, then looked at Quicksilver, and suddenly laughed. Only, we can kill that guy with one blow, destroy this base, and then find a base as a foothold. But that guy really died without a burial place. Is he really willing to risk his life and dare to bring down the Emperor? Kurami is sitting in the conference room, his two sides are fighting, and his expression is extremely excited. The meeting is about to start. He was already thinking about what words to say to reduce the risk of himself being exposed as much as possible, while also passing on the information. He secretly resented. I was caught off guard. With the presence of an acquaintance named Strucker, they were allowed to enter the base gate. All of those guys had extraordinary powers. Do you think I, Hydra, don't have super soldiers? After I pass on the information, in the early morning silence, a group of super soldiers come in from the secret passage, and it will be your turn to die. There is not only one kind of super soldier in Hydra, the Winter Soldier, that can be commanded. Just because of Steve's best friend Bucky, the name of the Winter Soldier is very popular. But in the final analysis, the Winter Soldier refers to a certain type of super soldier, and it's not just Bucky. Kurami's experimental base fell, and eventually the pigeons took over the magpie's nest. Kurami didn't think it was his own fault. He was completely tricked by Strucker. Everything was Strucker's. Wrong. When Hydra sends troops, not only Rorschach and the others will die. Straker must die too, Kurami thought bitterly in his heart. However, who he hates the most, in front of him it was who came down. There was no one else in the conference room, but at this moment the door was opened, and a sinister figure walked in. The light from the monocle reflected on Kurami, causing him to open his eyes wide, very surprised, of panic. Straker, can you believe it? Next door to the conference room, Rorschach and others watched all this indifferently. Wanda suddenly spoke and asked. In her eyes, there was a vague fear and concern about Straker. She and the Quicksilver brother and sister, the two had worked under Straker for many years and were familiar with the latter's methods. Therefore, they became more and more wary. Rorschach was extremely calm and replied straightforwardly. Not credible. Wanda was stunned when she heard this, and suddenly became anxious. Then shouldn't we stop them? Luo, Shaw laughed and said. Strucker is not trustworthy, but at this moment, he has no other choice but to work hard for us. He doesn't have the Sokovia military base. A base like that would serve no purpose, but Strucker himself is still alive. As far as Hydra is concerned, even if he is alive at this time, how long can he live? Sooner or later he will be dealt with. Strucker's big mistake has been made. The explosion of the base is the biggest original sin for him. No matter what the reason is, the Sokovia base is gone. As the person in charge, he has to bear the primary responsibility. It falls on Jutu. In the hands of a snake, death is certain. But in the hands of Rorschach, as long as he can still show his value, Rorschach can temporarily save his life. Which one is light and which one is heavy can be distinguished at a glance. Then Rorschach ordered, Ultron, it's your turn next. It is rare for so many high-level officials of Hydra to gather together, so you try your best to find out their specific locations. No matter how many network traps they set, they should be useless to you. Aochuang was particularly calm about this. Just leave it to me, the leader. This little thing will never trouble me. There was absolute confidence in his calm words. Luo Sha nodded and said. After invading the network system of their base, they lurked down and observed a lot to determine which one was risking their lives. If you meet someone who is loyal to Hydra and is really willing to give up his life, that's really a problem and will affect my plans. Then Rorschach asked again, how is the economy on the Aramco side prepared for action? How is the stock market going? Ultron replied, it is being manipulated, and within 3 months, a storm will sweep across North America. 3 months. Rorschach tasted it for a while, then nodded silently. Enough. The encrypted call between Rorschach and Ultron had some extreme twists and turns, which made Wanda and Quicksilver listen confused. It was difficult for them to know how much Rorschach had done in his daily life. But it was very difficult to know. Soon, they no longer need to think about these things that they are not good at, but turn their attention to the conference room. Seeing Strucker walking in the door, Kurami was somewhat nervous. Don't mess around. Lord Rorschach and the others are watching from outside. This is not the place for you to be arrogant. Looking at Kurami with a stern look on his face, Straker smiled sadly. I just listened to their orders and came here to see if you can tell the truth. After the meeting starts, I will retreat behind the scenes and focus on you. As long as you say a wrong word, I can survive, but you. Straker smiled gloomily and didn't say much. He can sit in the position of the head of the Sokovia base. His background is one thing, but more importantly, it is because he is far better than Kurami. It seems that you understand what I mean. Seeing that Kurami's face turned pale, Straker knew that he had decided on the latter, so he continued. So, don't be restless. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.